Hey everyone and welcome back to today's video. Apologies for the lack of videos recently. Life has just been life, I suppose. But today's video is going to be on the final reading goal that I set myself in 2019. Now, this reading goal was originally to read one fantasy book, but when I reviewed this goal halfway through the year, I spoke about how I was changing it. I was changing it to read a poetry collection, so to read one poetry collection a month. I was already quite an avid poetry reader, I guess, so I just wanted to make sure I continued doing that. When I look back for the year of 2019, I actually read 6 poetry collections in total, but from the time when I set the goal, it was actually 3. So basically 3 poetry collections out of 6 I've read. So I'm going to talk to you about the books that I read that fit underneath the goal, and then talk about how that fits in with the stats overall. And that will wrap up this series of just sort of looking back at my reading goals and how I did with them. So I guess the first thing to do is give you the percentage. So if we take into account the 3 books, that meant 4% of my reading was covered by poetry collections, but overall it would actually be 8% because I read 6 poetry collections in the year of 2019. So the books that I read from June onwards were Learning Rhythm, Grief is the Thing with Feathers, The Republic of Motherhood, and The Republic of Motherhood. So I read read Learning Rhythm in June, I read Grief is the Thing with Feathers in July, and then The Republic of Motherhood in August. Before that I had read Rue, a poetry collection, and then Running Upon the Wires by Kate Tempest, and then another poetry collection by Dean Atter, I think. So the first poetry collection I'm going to talk about is Grief is a Thing with Feathers, and this is by Quabina Folly. And this is a poetry collection that's basically about black men. It's about African love. I say African love is about being African, it's about love, and also basically being a black man in America. The illustration on the front cover is stunning, and so is the illustration on the back of it. It's just a really nice piece of artwork. And the poems are quite short, so a lot of the poems just end up being like, I'm not sure how well that can be seen on the screen, but end up being like that, and they will be ones that look a bit chunky, like a paragraph. I'm trying to find them now, so maybe there's only one. Basically the poems are really, really short. A lot of them are just like one-liners about the world, about his situation, about his experiences. For example, one of the poems is, you don't need to get the darkness out, you just need to let the light in. You know, it's like really short stuff like that, like the sort of Ruby Cool vibes when she writes short poetry. There's about 3 poems that I bookmarked. I wouldn't say I disliked this collection overall, I just didn't love it. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Whilst I think it's nice, I think I just thought there'd be more to it. I thought there'd be more words on a page. I feel like, here is the, I just found the bit with the essay, sort of. This is about love. I feel like because you cannot see that at all, this is what I get for filming in this room. I feel like because I have read a lot of Ruby Kaur and I'm like a huge fan of hers, when I see other poetry that is quite similar, which is fine, poetry can obviously be very similar, but when I see other poetry that's quite similar and it doesn't really do much for me, doesn't really tend to build on that, I just find it a bit empty and a bit soulless. And some of Ruby Kaur's like one-liners and stuff like that can also be quite soulless, so I don't know, I guess I just don't like it when I see it in other poets, which is just silly, but preference of style. So 3 out of 5 stars for this. So the next poetry collection I went on to read is Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, and I ended up reading that in July, I think. I listened to this on Scribd, so I listened to it as an audiobook, and it was really, really good. At first when I started listening to it, I was just like, no, this is the kind of thing that I do not like. I don't want to listen to this. But the more I got into it, the more like I was just, I guess, overcome with emotion and grief. Grief is a Thing with Feathers is about a father dealing with the death of his wife, and also his sons dealing with the death of their mother. So he has 2 sons, and they're in a flat in London, and it's basically talking about the grief that they face. And I think she passes away, and then a crow comes to visit the dad, and maybe the boys. You can never really tell if this is like just all imagined in his head, or if, you know, it's a bit of magic realism and there is actually a crow there. But this crow is basically very horrible to them and things like that. The dad is a scholar, so he focuses, I think he's doing some sort of scholarly work on Ted Hughes. and there's something there to do with, apparently Ted Hughes has a poem to do with crows or something like that, and he's writing something on the topic of that, and then I guess because as a result of that he is now envisioning an actual crow coming to visit him. The crow essentially ends up taunting the dad and the boys, but it's really mainly I think about the crow taunting the dad and, you know, how they're dealing with this grief. So I think you're never really able to tell if the dad is actually getting these visitors that he's talking about, so he's talking about people coming to visit them, making them food and stuff like that, or if this is all imagined. Like, it's just very hard to tell what is real and what is sort of maybe just not real. But yes, it's about coping with that grief of losing someone that you love, when you didn't imagine to lose them at that age, to lose them at the point where you're raising two boys who are kids, how to deal with their grief, how they're going to continue on with their life, and also how you're going to continue with your life. And I think also the Ted Hughes work that he's working on, the publishers are wanting the piece from him like very soon. I think perhaps the deadline has passed. So it's essentially about all of them dealing with that grief, and I think even though the crow is, you know, and because I listened to this on script, I thought when I was listening to it and initially I was just like, maybe better if I read this, but as it went on, like I think once it got past that 25% mark, I was engrossed. Like, I think the voice, I can't remember who narrates it now, but the voice of the crow and just the general narration, there was so much emotion in it and it just overwhelmed it. I think I would have been overwhelmed either way. The reason why I think that is because of the simplicity of the grief. The dad talks about the fact that he just misses really simple things about her, like, you know, her getting up and making breakfast in the morning, the way she used to do really little things. I have never experienced grief myself, but for some reason I imagine grief, the experience of grief is this huge thing of just the loss of that person. They're just no longer there. But I guess the little things that a person does that other people outside of your household would never notice, like those things I think punch you in the gut. And I think that's what this book made me realise, that grief is much more than just the missing person. It's all the little things that comes with someone that you lie next to every night, that someone that you share a space with, all of those things lost. And obviously he's watching her parent their children even. So again, the loss of all those little things. And I think it just really picked up on really delicate things that I had never thought about, and I just thought it was really captivating and I really loved it. Like I said, the reason why I gave it 4 stars overall is because I didn't like it in the beginning. I found it really hard to get into. I wasn't really sure what was happening, but once I got into it, I was like, I'm blown away. I really, really like it. I think the other thing that maybe perhaps put me off of this was the fact that it essentially is one long poem. So there was no sort of change in theme, there was no change in story or anything like that. It was continuous, which was fine, but I guess in the beginning that's not what I expected it to be. So I guess that was just sort of my expectations versus what it actually was. But overall, a wonderful collection that I can't fault too badly. I'm hoping I can just pick up a copy in the charity shop or something, because it's definitely a collection I want to own. I think the listening experience and the reading experience might be a bit different, but either way, very powerful. The final collection I'm going to speak about is The Republic of Motherhood by Liz Berry. This is such a small poetry collection, and I really like this. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I think this poetry collection does something that I tend to not like with poetry collections and maybe also essay collections, and it makes sense. The strongest poem is obviously always the first poem, and nothing else really seems to compare or stand up to that. However, that first poem is absolutely phenomenal. It's beautiful. So The Republic of Motherhood is about the experiences of motherhood, by Liz Berry. I think maybe she'd just become a new mother at that point, but she's talking about various experiences that, you know, happen or occur as a result of being pregnant and then being a mother, and it's just phenomenal. Thinking back to about this book, I'm also thinking so much about Sight by Jessie Greengrass, which is a novel about motherhood. The first poem talks about giving birth, like just the day-to-day activity of pushing the pram and things like that, and being in hospital. I'll read you the first 2 lines. It says, I crossed the border into the Republic of Motherhood and found it a queendom, a wild queendom. And I can get that. Like, I don't know if it's just a getting older thing. I think it mainly is. It's a getting older thing, and being around like people in my life who have given birth, the transformation in their life. And you can imagine that, you know, as much as there are stories out there of giving birth, and you've probably maybe grown up with your siblings or maybe people around you giving birth, it's probably a very different experience when it happens to you and then your life is changed. And she just talks about so many different things. Like there's a bit in here where she says, I stood with my sisters in the queues of motherhood, the weighing clinic, the supermarket, waiting for its bureaucracies to open their doors. And you can understand that when there are so many different things in terms of what happens when you give birth, maybe registering your baby, going to the doctor, getting injections, but even just like things like supermarket, obviously there's no bureaucracy there, but just the fact that it's not just a simple food shop, now it's navigating that pram and also being able to pick up all the goods you need, and just the extra space that actually physically takes up and the change in your life. I thought Liz did a really good thing of showing that to the reader. There are also poems in here about this sort of invasiveness that you face when you give birth or when you're in hospital, other people touching you, just the invitations of like, obviously like nurses and stuff touching you, but other people. I think she just manages to capture how invasive it might be even when you're in the hospital room, like you just sort of detached from your body because people have to check different things and that body is no longer yours because you are giving birth to another human. Overall, I feel like a lot of aspects of motherhood are covered in this. There's like a poem on the placenta, there's the sort of stories about like singing your child to sleep, the love that you have for your child. I feel like a huge spectrum of different things of motherhood are covered in just such a small poetry collection. I think there's in total 26 pages if you count the glossary and the acknowledgements. And another thing I will say, the glossary is really handy because I think Liz Berry is from like Northern England or something, so there are a couple of words that are just known to them but might not be very widely known, so there's a nice little glossary at the back. Overall, I thought it was a really stunning poetry collection. I will give it another reread because it's just so small, like it's really easy to get through it. But like I said, as much as I loved the other poems in this, the first one was by far the strongest and nothing else just seemed to compare. Out of all the poetry collections that I read, my highlight would definitely be Grief is a Thing with Feathers and The Republic of Motherhood. Both had really, really strong poems in there. Like Grief is a Thing with Feathers is actually like one continuous long poem. They both had parts I didn't like in there, but overall when I think back to them, I just think phenomenal. So if we look at the total stats for my reading goals for 2019, I talked about this already in the previous video, but science fiction, 23% of my reading, African literature, 21%, essays, 4%, mythology, 3%, and poetry, 3%. So in total, 54% of my reading in 2019 was made up of the reading goals that I set myself, and everything else would have fallen out of those reading goals and they would have just been books that I picked up willy-nilly. I think that figure is very interesting because I'm trying to decide how I feel about, you know, sort of reading essentially within a goal or something like that. But I think it's fine because I still feel like I read very freely within those goals. I think because they were so free, it didn't ever really feel like I was reading from a TBR. There was only a distinct amount of books that I could only read from. I think the other section of my reads, were, a lot of them I think were books that I picked up from NetGalley. And I'm going to try in 2020 to not request so many books from NetGalley. I get really carried away with the, you know, covers or the blurbs about books, and then I read them and I'm just like, I did not enjoy that. And I've got tons of books that I physically own and need to get through, so I will try not to do that. But yeah, that was my reading for this year. 54% was made up of the reading goals that I set myself last year, and the rest were just reads that I picked up whenever. So that is it for this video. Those are the three sort of poetry collections that I read as part of like these reading goals. The other three obviously still count. There are tons of books that I read in 2019 that fall out of the scope of these reading goals, and I have decided to just do away with doing a 2019 like my best books of 2019. I did one halfway through the year, actually did two because I ended up splitting the video in half because it was so long. There are so many books that I loved like through the second half of the year, and I'm just going to list them, what, here? No, this side. I'm just going to list them on this side on the screen. I won't speak about them, maybe I'll be able to speak about them during the course of the year, but if truth be told, I just kind of don't feel like doing that video. Like I feel like I've spoken about these books individually, so hopefully you'll know like there's my sort of love for them, and if not, I will also leave my Goodreads link down below so you can see books that I gave 4 or 5 stars to. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in another one. Bye.